What's interesting about recovery is that it forced me to really challenge my limiting beliefs. Can I get sober? Can I evolve into what I think of as a good person? Your default mode network is very closely tied to identity. And so recovery for me ended up being about a process where I was recovering my whole self, the good parts and what I thought of as the bad parts. And as it turns out, spoiler alert, that the bad parts were actually parts, they were like my survival skills. They were trying to help me survive.
Well, hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and we are glad you're all here, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery as a whole and newcomers to this podcast. Sober Speak is a podcast about recovery centered around the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. My job here on Sober Speak is simple. My job is to provide a platform to the amazing stories of recovery all around us. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for AA or any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb for the trash man to pick up. From Studio AA, deep in the heart of Texas, that was the voice of Arlina A that you heard at the beginning of this episode, and you are going to hear so much more from Arlina in just a moment on this here episode. What are we on? 394, I think, right? I forgot to look before I got in here. I think I'm on 394. Ooh, inching closer to 400 for whatever. Well, for if that's a big deal at all. But nonetheless, you're going to hear so much more from Arlina in just a moment. But first things first, this here episode is brought to you by Libby. And so you ask yourself, exactly what did Libby do? Well, she went to our humble little website, www.soberspeak.com, and Libby clicked on the little yellow donation tab and made a contribution. So thank you so much, Libby, for your generosity. This here episode is coming right out to you. And of course, in the back of my head, I'm singing the Libby song. Gosh, it's been so long. Oh, can I remember this? When you see Libby, Libby, Libby on the table, 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 you will like it, like it, like it on the label, label, label. Oh, wait a sec. I think I got that backwards. When you see Libby, Libby, Libby on the label, 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 you will like it, like it, like it on the table, table, table. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, that's okay. That is quite all right. I don't know. It's amazing. My wife always says, it's amazing the things that you remember and do not remember. And I guess that just happened to be stuck in the back of my little pea brain somewhere. Anyway, thank you if you're new to the podcast here, we're not just here to talk about alcohol at all. We talk about overcoming adversity, hope, the incredible human spirit, being rocketed into the fourth dimension, and much, much more. And we're so glad that you have joined us today. Now let's go right on into actually, you know what? I do have a little piece of listener feedback I want to read here on the beginning of the episode today. And I'll be honest with you, the reason I'm reading it on the beginning of the episode is so I don't have to go record a what we call an outro, right? You have your intro and your outro in the business here, even though this is not a business, but nonetheless, this way I don't have to record our listener feedback at the end. But anyway, Greg wrote in And I really love this email. Greg wrote, and he says, "Hi, John. I'm not an alcoholic, but I've been working the program in a fellowship dealing with sexual addiction for 11 years. I am incredibly grateful that AA has been willing to share the steps and traditions with those of us who suffer from other addictions. I recently came across your podcast and almost randomly looking for something to listen to while driving down the road for work. I found the one that played Clancy on an old AA recording, and it really inspired me for that day. The particular actions of my addictions are not my real program. The real problem, excuse me. The myth of terminal uniqueness is God. It's the myth of terminal uniqueness. God does incredible things for all of us kids when we let Him. I am neither the wisest nor the dumbest one out there. Just another bozo on the bus. I can relate, Greg. Thanks for reminding me of this. Thanks for your service and all of us addicts. And God bless you sincerely, Greg in Columbus, Ohio. Gosh, thank you so much for writing in, Greg. I appreciate it. I always love to hear from people, not only in Alcoholics Anonymous, but other 12-step programs as well. And that really did make my day, you sending that in, Greg. Thanks for taking time out of your schedule to do it. If anyone else wants to write in an email about addiction or anything else for what I care, just write me at John, JOHN, at soberspeak.com. All right, now on to Arlina. Arlina is from Boise, Idaho, and she wrote a book called The 12 Steps, and we're calling this one The 12 Steps for Skeptics. Arlina has been sober for 31 years, and she wrote a book aptly named The 12 Steps for Skeptics. This episode is jam-packed with information, and I happen to know that many of you listening out there across the cosmos, is that a word, are indeed skeptics when it comes to the 12 steps. And I know that because I hear from you on a consistent basis. For one reason or another, you may scoff at the steps, and I get that. I was in the same boat. Thought, how is all this, I don't know, Santa Claus, Easter Bunny stuff going to help me out? Well, Arlina decided to write a book addressing that very thing. Arlina discusses her own podcast. And by the way, I'm going to put links to all this stuff in the show notes. So if you want to click on it there, you can. But nonetheless, she discusses her own podcast, the 3 trailer words in AA that generally give people a hard time, sponsorship she discusses, wounds that we all have underneath the surface and that need to be healed, survival skills, Arlina's 3 alter egos, which she calls Wimpy Wendy, Badass Betty, and Slutty Susan. Anyway, she discusses recovery resistance and what that means, our false limiting beliefs, the link between creativity and experiencing God, and much, much more. Once again, I'll have links to the to these various things in the show notes. You're going to have links to her podcast, her website, her free workshop, her free workshop, and something that she calls the inner compass program. And if you need anything else, you can reach out to me and I'll forward it to Alina if you forget her links and all that stuff. Once again, you can reach me at John, JOHN, at soberspeak.com. And this week, we will not have plenty feedback at the listener feedback at the end of this episode. So and I hope to be back next week. If I don't make it, God bless you, and may God bless you and keep you until then, and all that other stuff. I really screwed this up, but anyway, you're really going to enjoy Arlina. Forget my silliness. Okay, everybody. So today we're sitting here with a very, very special guest, Miss Arlina. Arlina and I have actually been on an episode in the past, but anyway, I'll talk about that in just a moment. So Arlina, will you please go ahead, introduce yourself, give your sobriety date if you wish, and then tell people where you live in this great land of ours, please.
Sure. And first, thank you so much for having me back. It's always good to see you. My name is Arlina, and my sobriety date is April 23rd of 94. And I am now in the Boise, Idaho area.
Okay, so that was going to be one of my questions. I think the last time we talked and recorded an episode, you were in California, right?
Yes, sir. I was in the Silicon Valley area. That's where I'm from. But 5 years ago, we moved to Idaho.
And is that a culture shock? How's that been?
Man, so what was weird, so listen, I'm from Silicon Valley, it's a melting pot, right? And then I move out to Boise, Idaho, and it's white. It's very white,
Right.
which was weird. I was just, it wasn't bad. It wasn't good. It was just like, oh,
Just
wow, this
this.
is really,
Yeah.
yeah, this is really different. And, but the people here are lovely. Um, it, it's just been, you know what, John, I am happier than I had dared hope to be. Like I knew it was going to be hard leaving my community where I had standing. I had what do you everybody knew who we were. My husband is 35 years sober. I'm almost 31 years sober. We had sort of significance and position and standing in our community, and we come out here and it was such a blessing to just be like totally anonymous. No history. So that was kind of cool, but on the other hand, it's like nobody knows who we are.
Right.
We don't have any credibility. We don't have any history with anyone. It was really weird.
And so what took you out there? Was it one of your jobs or something?
No, actually, we had some friends that moved out here, and I was like, Idaho, why Idaho? I thought it was so weird. And then they were here for about a year. We finally came out to visit. And meanwhile, during that year, I was on Zillow looking at housing because, the Silicon Valley is super expensive,
Oh, yeah.
right? Crazy expensive. I was about a half an hour from downtown San Jose. And, the housing prices were insane. And I was looking at the housing prices. You could get 4 times the house for like half as much. And so, that's pretty much what we did. We sold our teeny tiny little house for a gazillion dollars and had a big ass house built here in Idaho. And yeah, it's just like the cost of living is, it's amazing here.
Yeah, you're not the only. There's a lot of people who, as you know, who have left California. And the same thing, and we had a big influx here in Texas of people from
What
California.
what area of what area of Texas are you in?
On the north side of Dallas in a place called Frisco.
Okay. Okay, nice. Yeah. Yeah, we've
So,
had several friends move to, like, the Austin area,
yep.
Spicewood, that area.
Yep, and they call that a Silicon Valley South nowadays. It's, what they call it at least, and so
Yeah, it's
she's
so
been,
funny.
I think, like 3 years. A good podcaster would have had the episode number that you were on before and tell people about it. It was a great interview. I actually enjoyed it very much. But I know it's been like
Me too.
3 years or so since we were on the show. And this is one thing I'll always remember about that episode, is you and so I was recording you, and for whatever reason, I think I just forgot to hit the pause button or the stop button or whatever it was.
We kept talking.
And we kept talking, and we were kind of going on. And I don't think we said anything real bad, but kind of like some of that off the mic stuff. And so one of the listeners wrote in and they said, "Hey, you and Arlene are kind of going on at the end of that thing." And I went back and I edited it and replaced it. But
I've done that.
yeah.
I've done that. Yeah, it's funny.
But the worst is like today. So in fact, you just made me look. Did I hit the record button? And yes, I hit the
Yes.
record button. The worst is when you go through a whole episode and don't hit the record button and you have to call the person and say, "I am so sorry."
I've done that too. That's embarrassing.
Okay, so that brings me into this. So Arlina has her own podcast and she's recently written a book. So talk about your podcast and we'll get a little bit more into your book. It's called ODAT, right? ODAT
Well,
chat.
it's called yeah, it's, now called One Day at a Time. I changed it, probably 4 or 5 years ago. I feel like it's been a long time since we talked. I had to change it, you know why? Because
Nobody
people
knows.
outside of the recovery bubble didn't know what ODAT meant.
Right.
I was, like, insulated in my little recovery bubble, and I just kinda thought everybody knew what that meant. But in fact, no, nobody else knows what that means. So it's One Day at a Time
Uh,
recovery podcast now.
yeah. Okay, right. So, and we have a meeting here in this area. It's called the ODAT group. So I happen to know what, because you're right though, but people outside of the recovery community, unless they're like involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, in fact, it was many years before I knew what ODAT was, and I was involved in the community. So I could see where
Yeah.
people would get confused. And you called it the ODAT chat, right? Which I like.
Yeah, kinda like the alliteration of it, kind of a snappy little sound, and I named it after my favorite I used to go to a meeting every morning at 6 a.m. Except for on Sunday, I'd go to a different meeting, I'd sleep until 7:30. I'm not a great sleeper, so I'm an early riser, but I named it, and, it's kind of a, I don't know if you want me to tell the story, but the reason I started the podcast is I was going into this meeting, and I loved these people. It's a really special group of just such loving, compassionate, gentle, supportive, loving people. Anyway, there was a gal in my group at that meeting who she'd been suffering with chronic pain. She would have migraines and she wasn't sleeping well and it was chronic, right? And I didn't go one morning and I had to be at work early and I'm at work and I get a phone call and she had gotten a single car accident and died. She was at that morning at 6 a.m. and died 3 hours later. And I was like, "You know what? This podcast that I was doing a different podcast that was around sales because that's the work that I did, but it was on my heart to do one around recovery, and this is 8 years ago, almost 9 years ago now, and there weren't a lot of recovery podcasts back then, and I was afraid if I did but it was really on my heart to do a podcast, but I was afraid of what my community would say because of the traditions and anyway, but when Gina died, it was like I saw myself in her. She wasn't that much older than me. She looked like me. She was also half Mexican like me. And I just saw myself in her and the dreams that died with her. And I just was like, you know what? This feels like a higher calling and I need to follow my heart. And so I decided to jump in and I recorded that first podcast. And my heart was pounding when I hit publish that first time. Side note, nobody's listening yet. So it's, you know, but it was for me, it was a leap of faith. I took a leap of faith and listened to the calling of my heart. It's been 8.5 years, 360 interviews later. I've met Elizabeth Gilbert, Dr. David Siegel, Anna Lemke, just like all these really amazing people who are doing amazing work in the world. And I am reaching the far like you were talking when were talking earlier, reaching the far corners of the world. It's like people have downloaded my podcast from like Zimbabwe, Japan, in the Middle East. It's like you just never know, you know, who you're going to impact with these stories, right? And it's not our job to figure it out. We just do the next right thing, tune into your heart, take the next right step and trust and have faith. And I think if we have good intentions and good motives, that beautiful things will flourish from it.
I agree. Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Um,
Mm.
I'm always amazed that when I see somebody downloaded some of my episodes in some country, I was like, I didn't even know that was a country. What is this? Where? And
We
I'm
have
glad that
friends
was.
everywhere.
Yes, we
Yeah.
do. Okay, so all right, so you have the so it's one day at a time podcast. The chat part is not on there anymore, right?
No, it's One Day at a Time recovery podcast. I put the recovery in there because there's a few other one day at a time podcasts that focus on different things. So
Okay.
I kind of threw in recovery.
Yeah, 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 sure. And if you'll send me the URLs to those after this is over, I'll make sure to include them in the show notes when this is released.
Okay.
Okay, so I do listen to your podcast. I like it, and
Yeah.
it's a little bit of a different flavor of mine, which is good, right? That's why we all do it. Different hosts do different things, and but I do love it. And I was recently listening to one. I remember thinking, man, she's got some real insight because I was listening to this episode where you were kind of doing a sober coaching thing with this one particular guy, and he said, I think he was from New York or something like that. It was from the Northeast.
Philly, Jersey, something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and you said something. You said s- you said, yeah, I was yelling at her, or she was yelling at me, and then you said you stopped. You go, oh, yeah, people yell because they don't think they're being heard.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, I was like, oh, wow, she has some real not, and I've heard you coaching other people as too, and you have some real insight. Do you have like I don't know, like uh, uh, s- first of all, I'm always, just because somebody has a certification doesn't mean they're really good at what they do, right?
John, you are
Uh,
not lying. You are speaking truth.
but do you have like certification? Have you gotten
I
those,
do.
or is it just from experience?
So, well, I have been sober for 31 years. I'm an obsessive self-help junkie, but I'm really focused on application, like behavior change, right? I consider myself a researcher. And, but I did go through a coaching certification, which is not sponsorship. So I just want to be really clear about that. I would never charge people like to do the steps. That's not what it's about. But I also did get a coaching certification in hypnosis because I went to a hypnosis and had a really profound experience processing my father's. It was so funny because I went there for like what I thought were confidence issues because I found myself wanting to do things. And I'm like, why am I not able to follow through on the things that I want to follow through on? And I have since learned it was about resistance, and we can talk about that later. But I went there, and what came up was I needed to process my father's death. My father had passed away, and I don't know if I dissociated, but I was partly relieved. He'd been sick, and he was older. He was almost 85 when he died, but he'd been sick for a while. So when he passed, I felt relieved. I didn't really, when my mother died also later, a couple years later, and that was profound grief for me. But at the time, I was just like relieved, and I felt guilty about being relieved that he died, but I did feel relieved. But it was interesting. I went to this gal to do hypnosis for confidence, and what came up was that I needed to process my father's death. He was, he's a very loving, he was a really good person, John, but he was also always played devil's advocate with me. So I never felt like he was on my side. I never felt good enough and those kinds of things. And so, I think that was kind of at the root of me constantly questioning myself, the imposter syndrome, not good enough. That was like deep seated stuff. And the hypnosis, like healing that relationship with my father and forgiving myself, forgiving him, the compassion and acceptance during that hypnosis process was like so life changing. I was like, I need to go do this and incorporate that into my coaching practice. It's been really
That is so
powerful.
cool. In fact, it's weird. I saw something on hypnosis on TV the other night, and I was like, hey, maybe I should do that. We'll talk when we get off. But
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
that's really neat. And and let me say this: there are people who say, and you put that disclaimer on the front end. There's a difference between taking somebody through the steps and then what we call getting outside help, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like there is a buddy of mine who has a great guy. He has a couple of sober houses here in the area.
Uh-huh.
And I would much rather him be running those sober houses versus somebody who's just kind of they're in it to make a buck and they don't know anything about the recovery community. And so what I'm saying is I'd much rather you be doing uh, giving me outside help
Yeah.
when you understand the steps and you know exactly what I'm experiencing on a day to day basis in the recovery community. So I think that's great what you're doing.
Yeah.
Absolutely fantastic.
And I really do love the peer support that we get in AA and in any 12-step program, really. I really love the peer support, but there is something really important about incorporating professional support.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, those of us I was a terrible sponsor at first because I hadn't finished doing my own healing. Like I had some serious trauma that I needed to process. But I had finished the steps and what they say, when you're done with the steps, you need to take somebody else through the steps. And so I did that, but I was being triggered by these people I was working with and responding through this lens of my wound. Right. And I think I hurt some people, to be perfectly honest. I don't think I was that good of a sponsor, and then, but I got with practice, I got way better. And I had some sponsors that would be like, it's not your job to give advice. Your only job is to tell them, listen, be honest, and share what comes up for you and try to frame it in a way that's like, this is what I did. Like, that sounds familiar. I think I went through that too. Here's the action. Well, here, let me validate your feelings first. Here's the action that I took. It was like a way more compassionate, um, sponsee focused approach. And the after 31 years, the only thing I'm clear on is I don't know what's right for anybody else.
Uh-oh.
That's the only thing I'm clear on. Maybe I'm clear on some other things, but I'm very clear on that.
I understand that. Boy, do I understand that. All right, so let's talk then about because I was really uh, fascinated by the title of this book that you wrote because I think it's a now let me just tell you this too. Right, I am more of an audio guy, but is there an audio version of this book?
I'm going to. I'm a
Okay.
podcaster, for heaven's sakes. I should be. Yeah, it's in the works, but I'm in the middle of creating this program. But it was funny. I published the book and then jumped right into, like a total workaholic, jumped right into the next project. This is so crazy. But, yes, the audiobook is coming. I keep hearing I only listen to audiobooks. Me and my ADHD brain have a hard time with the
Right.
physical
That's
copy.
for whatever reason, I can listen to books. It's a hard,
Yeah.
and this is not, I wish this was not the case because I encourage my kids to read and they read, like, read, 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 read. But I just want them learning somehow, some way. And that's
Yeah.
really what I meant. And my wife loves to read. My daughter loves to read. I think my son's more like me, but, so I haven't I'm being honest, I haven't read the book. However, I love the premise of it, and
Yeah.
I've seen some of the bullet points around it, but let's just talk about it, right? First of all, what's the
Okay.
title of the book? The 12 Steps for
It's a
Skeptics, right?
it's a 12-step guide for skeptics. So it's clearing up common misconceptions of a path to sobriety. And the reason I wrote it is, I'm on social media and, I see a lot of 12-step bashing,
Mhm.
a lot of AA bashing, and it just hurts my heart. And I feel like, listen, some of it is valid. Like, people are vulnerable and in pain and they go to meetings, and if they may not have a good experience for a variety of reasons, and they come away, they come to a conclusion, and they basically throw the baby out with the bathwater, and they come to the conclusion that this is not a good modality for me, and they don't go. But because they're hurt, they openly vent on social media about their negative experiences. And I just saw this over and over and over again, and it just breaks my heart. And you're kind of alluding to the fact that not everybody is qualified to help people get sober. And what I'm seeing is, a lot of people with a year of sobriety claiming to be sober coaches. There's a lot of come join my community, and I'm conflicted because I really buy into this idea of each one teach one. Like, if you really want to learn something, you need to teach it to someone else, right? That's why we sponsor people after we've been through, because it reinforces it allows us to go over the material over and over again. And as we absorb the information, we change. And then the next time we address the information, we get something different out of it because we're different, right? So you just learn more and more as you go over and over. You keep changing and changing, and you keep. That's why people always say, "Oh, I've been reading this big book for 30 years, and I get something different out of it all the time." It's yes, because you're different every time you read the book. It's like that's why people read the same books over and over again. We get different things out of them every time. But, yeah, I just saw this, and because of the, public relations policy from AA.org, there is no it's not promotion, it's attraction, and so in this day and age, I see this as problematic in some ways because there is no so I was like, "You know what? I've been waiting for y'all to write a book to clear up these misconceptions. No one's doing it, so I'm gonna take it upon myself to be like, "Hey, here are some of the challenges that I see within this community, because God love us. It is not the hotbed of mental health, right? Which is why we go.
Right.
Which is
I
why we
always
go."
say, yeah, all you people out there, like when they're I was just at a conference recently speaking, and I said, I know you guys are looking for Mr. and Mrs. Right Now. And I think you ought to go strap on your wacko magnets and, kind of attract to each other. And you're right. It's not a hotbed of mental health.
It is not. So sometimes we hurt each other's feelings, but I would argue that that's not a bad thing. Like, if you get triggered at a meeting, that's actually not a bad thing. They say that the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off.
Right.
But if you can kinda hang in there and take your gripe to your sponsor. So if you have a good sponsor, they can help you identify what's underneath that. And typically there's some wound underneath that needs to come to the surface to be healed. And I heard this gal talk about this analogy. It's like, a gemologist will take two rough amethysts and put them in a tumbler together. And as these rough amethysts sort of bump up against each other, they're knocking off the rough edges so that when they come out, they're smooth. I feel like that's how we are at meetings. We go to meetings, we share, we hear other people, we mix it up, people date. There's all kinds of shenanigans happening at meetings. And I feel like every time I had a challenge with somebody and I went through the steps, I came out a little softer on the other side. There's this idea of if you spot it, you got it. I cannot recognize a character defect unless I have it myself. And that so the key there is to not just recognize that I have these character defects, but to then bring self-compassion and recognize that these are actually survival skills that I had to develop to survive, and to not be so judgmental and harsh and hateful with myself because they allowed me to survive. You can't hate yourself well. We have to find ways of recognizing, oh, this was a survival skill. I no longer need it. We find sufficient substitutes so that we can be gentler with ourselves and others. And so this whole process of like mixing it up sort of allows us to smooth out over time, and we can be gentler with ourselves and others.
I agree. Okay, so talk about, if you will, some of the trigger words, if you will, within Alcoholics Anonymous that kind of keep people away, and why they're skeptics, and what they think they heard, so to speak, when they went into the meeting.
Yeah.
Talk about some of that.
Yeah, so the first thing I kind of want to clear up is that meetings and the program are two separate things. And typically when people have a problem with AA, they're talking about the people. So
Yeah.
we just and no, I just want to say no one person, my initials are AA, but I do not represent the organization, let's just put the people aside for a moment and talk about the actual steps, because that's where the trigger words are for a lot of people.
And I just want to tell you real quick that when I interviewed you several years back, one thing that you said during that interview that always stuck with me up until this day. In fact, I use it. I don't give you credit, Arlena, but I definitely use it
I
in me.
stole it from someone else. Lord.
And you said, when people come into the rooms and they're struggling with God, what they generally do, they're struggling with someone else's conception of God.
Mm-hmm.
And so anyway, I want to thank you for, and I don't, as you know, when you're doing 350 interviews or whatever, you don't remember every single thing that every single person said, right? And
Yeah.
some impact you more than another. But I remember you, I remember interviewing you. You were sitting on, I had never interviewed somebody. You were just real comfortable, just kind of sitting on your bed and just kind of, we were having a conversation. You had your little earbuds in and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And when you said that, though, I go, oh, that makes sense. I wasn't, and I thought for me, when I came, I wasn't really struggling with God per se. I was struggling of what people were telling me that God was. But anyway, I
Yeah,
interrupted you.
that's a
Go on with
big one.
your,
And really that's probably one of the biggest trigger words. There's 3. So it's God, powerless, and alcoholic. People really bristle at those words. And yeah, so I think you covered the God thing pretty well. I had a sponsor, Kimmers. I read about her in the book with her permission. And I'm going to meetings and, I meet this gal and she's so gentle and kind and wise and she's close to my age. And I pull her aside. I was like, look, if I keep hearing about God, if this is what this is, I'm not going to be able to do this. And she's like, oh, I got you. Don't even worry about it. She goes, here, she got a piece of paper or whatever. And she was like, here, write down, let's just for funsies, let's pretend there's a God and write down all the attributes that you would want. Yeah, just for fun. Write down all the attributes you would want God to have if it was a thing. And I was like, fine. So I was like, I'm the favorite. That God is all powerful, all loving. I had this idea of like a master organizer, arranging things ahead of me, just like kind of all these things. Energy is really the energy of love. Like I could kind of get behind that. And then I wrote down all the things I didn't want it to be: jealous, punishing, condemning, um, like all these, like I didn't, God, fear God, like all this. I didn't want any of that. And then she was like, okay, are you done? And I was like, yep. Handed her the piece of paper. She tore it in half. And she handed me the good side. And she's like, okay, we're going to start with this. I was like, that's it. She's like, that's it. I was like, oh my God. Hurdle overcome.
yep.
Amazing. I was like, okay. She just lowered the bar for me. And I was like, okay, I can get behind energy of love. I don't know. And to this day, like, I'm not like a sky daddy girl. Like I grew up religious with the image of the sky daddy and I'm like, yeah, that still doesn't fit for me, but I get the whole,
Sky Daddy.
yeah, it's kind of
I had
cute. I
not
think,
heard that one before,
yeah,
believe it or
I
not.
don't mean that in a disparaging way, but,
No, I get it.
yeah, I love the archetype of the father and the mother, and I feel like that, you know, it makes sense that we translate these ideas in ways that we can understand, and people understand the archetype of the family. Like, but to be honest, I don't really believe in like a gendered God. I yeah. So anyway, that's kind of where I've landed. I don't really know what it is, but I know that if I take certain actions, ask for help, and do certain things, I invoke this law of cause and effect and have experiences. So that's just kind of how I make sense of it. And I kind of let go of like the need to fully understand. It's not important that I understand, to be honest. And I do sort of lean on the sciencey side because when I don't have faith, I have science. right? And there are times when I don't have faith. There are times when I'm like, I don't think God is going to fix me in this very particular way. I don't, that's not my own limited belief system. No one's going to come help me. There's no help. I got to figure it out. But figure it out is not a slogan, as it
Right.
turns out, because you can't think your way into right living. You have to live your way into right thinking. And and that is kind of like a sciencey thing that my brain it like makes sense to me. And that's what Cameras was trying to tell me is this thing God, it just needs to be something that makes sense to you, even if it's just like me and you talking together. That is, you and I together are stronger than me by myself, and that is all that makes sense. That is enough. That is enough.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it kinda goes back to that, one of those ideas of, I'd much rather be hanging out with somebody who at least claims to be an atheist, and I have, my opinions on that, are the real true atheists, but anyway, someone who's an atheist and acts well versus somebody who is a real believer and, doesn't act well. I think God cares more about our actions and how we treat others and, how we treat ourselves in the whole 9 yards.
100% agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, so you said God is one of those trigger words, and then alcoholic and powerless, and I definitely have some experience with that, but go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah. So, really, the essence of the context and perspective that I want to offer is that we get to define what words mean for us. So, who gets to decide what God means to you? You do. And let's take that lesson and extrapolate that, sort of open the aperture a little bit and assign that to the word alcoholic. I think it conjures up very specific ideas of somebody who is behaving really badly, who's living on the street. There's all kinds of negative images that come up when you think of the word alcoholic. However, I started going to meetings and there were these women that were introducing them into, but people that were introducing themselves as alcoholic who were professional, who were successful, who were kind and wise, and they were everything I wanted to be. They were everything I had aspired to be. And they were calling themselves alcoholic. And I was baffled by it. I was shocked at that at first. And then I decided I want to be like these people. And then what I realized very early on is that people who use that word are typically people who are submitting to this 12-step process, which requires a tremendous amount of courage, honesty, persistence, determination, consistency. And those are qualities and attributes that I really admire. It's not easy. And so over time, I began to associate this word of alcoholic as someone who is a badass. I was like, "Ooh, someone who identifies as that has no shame about it." Right? They're just very comfortable. My name's Arlina. I'm an alcoholic. I'm so comfortable with it because I have an entirely, not just a new definition, but a different experience of what that actually means. I feel so good about it.
Nice, nice. Yeah, I get it. Um, and what about that word power? And let me just tell you real quick before you start on power. This is one of the things that really kept me. I was in and out for 3 years, kept picking up
Mhm,
desire chips over and over. I think they call them white chips in California, whatever they are, right? But the chip to
mhm,
where you're starting over, I kept picking them up. And one of the big reasons is that I could not say when I could tell you I was an alcoholic,
mhm,
but I really struggled with being powerless over as an alcoholic. And in fact, it wasn't for me. One of the other, I guess, misconceptions is that you have to take step one entirely, because what happened is I didn't take it entirely. I went through the fourth step and the fifth step. And when I went through the fourth and fifth step, I was like, oh my goodness, I am an alcoholic through and through. This is absolutely nuts. Look at what I've been
mhm.
doing. And so I struggled with that word powerless. It would kind of get stuck in my craw. I just couldn't say I'm
Sure.
powerless over alcohol. But talk to me about powerlessness and what do you think the misconception is about that?
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the things that really bother me, because actually it's a phrase. It's powerless over alcohol, right? And what I would argue is that, in a sense, we're all powerless over alcohol. Once you ingest alcohol, it kicks off a cascade of chemical reactions, a chain of events that you cannot reverse at will, right? It's like, and it's predictable and it does very specific things, and we come to rely on it. However, for some of us, like when I ingested alcohol, there was some other things that happened to me that didn't happen to people that don't have like alcohol use disorder. And I recognize that it's a spectrum, right? There's people who can take it and leave it, people who can stop. Listen, I'm not one of those people, and I was very clear about that. But it's powerless over alcohol in the sense that when I have enough data I had enough data to just be like, when I ingest alcohol, it kicks off like this feeling of wanting more. And I would drink huge quantities of alcohol, behave badly, black out. Over time, I built up a tolerance. I could, I'm short. I'm 5'3", 120 pounds. I could drink men twice my size under the table because I was building up this tolerance. But and then would kick in like this obsession. Like pretty soon, like that's all I wanted to do. And it didn't happen. And I wasn't a daily drinker. I was a binge drinker. So it was easy for me to be like, oh, I'm not a daily drinker. I'm not homeless. Like I had a great job. I had a bougie apartment. I was young when I got sober. I didn't lose a marriage do you know what I mean? It's like I didn't have but I hated who I was, which was probably the worst part. But it was, then I couldn't stop. When I recognized it was a problem, I couldn't stop because I didn't have like a sufficient substitute. So for me, I was powerless over the choice of whether I was going to drink or not and how much I drank.
Right.
Yeah, so that's kinda how the powerlessness played out for me. But I had been raised with the idea my mom had always talked about this, and I never give her credit for this, but she used to talk a lot about the power of choice. And I didn't have power of choice over alcohol, but I did have power of choice of whether I went to a meeting or not, whether I was consuming information that was going to expand my mind. I got lucky, and this is kind of weird, but I came across this Tony Robbins 30-day cassette program. It was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. It was a cassette thing. And I was introduced to this idea, if you change your mind, you can change your life. And that always really, you hear things that stick with you, like you're talking about. That was one of the things that really stuck with me. And so I recognized that I did have some power, but it was just this thing about the alcohol. Like I didn't have power over that. I didn't have the power to stop once I started. First of all, I didn't have a power over the choice whether I was going to or not, especially if I was going out, especially if I was going to a bar, especially if I was going manhunting that night, because that's what I did at that age at 25. Do you know what I mean? It was total insanity. Um, so that's what we're talking about. When we talk about powerless, it's really about acknowledging reality. It's about acknowledging the data that you already have. You don't need to run the experiment anymore. You have enough data to come to a conclusion. And for me, it was like the data are clear. I cannot moderate. And I do not behave well once I start drinking. I always joke around that I had these two alter egos, Wimpy Wendy or Badass Betsy, because I was either fighting or crying when I drank. I was like, I don't want to be friends with them anymore.
Wimpy Wednesday or what were
Badass
their names?
Betsy.
Wimpy Wendy, right?
Yeah, Wimpy Wendy, Badass Betsy. And truth be told, later I was like, okay, there's a third alter ego that comes out, Slutty Susan. We don't need to talk about her, but everybody loved her. Quite literally. I used to joke around that if it was in a bottle, a bag, or blue jeans, I was doing it. I had a good time.
I got it, right. Um, Okay, so I've also heard you talk about the term before, recovery resistance.
Yeah.
What is recovery resistance to you?
Okay, this is I have to tell a little story. So recovery resistance really speaks to the idea that everybody wants the transformation within their current belief system. And I would just like to propose that if you could change within your current belief system, when you have done it already, like in a belief system, you know, we are young and our beliefs when we're young, we have experiences, we come to conclusions about who we are, about the world, things like that. And this belief system is typically established by the time you're 8 years old, right? And in neuroscience terms, they call this the default mode network. It's like your brain's operating system. And so, like, if I, in the example I give in the book is, I'd run up to mom, all excited about something, and she was in the middle, so she'd turn around and yell at me, and I walk away just devastated, being like, oh, she doesn't love me. I'm a bad person, things like that. What I was lacking was context and perspective, right? But what I developed was a limiting belief that I'm not good enough. Right. And the context and perspective that I was lacking was that she was stressed out. It was not a good time for her. She was in the middle of something. She was stressed out. She didn't have any coping skills either, by the way. My mom had a little bit of a anger issue when I was young. And I didn't know any of that. I just thought she didn't love me and that I was a bad person. But that's a limiting belief. And so recovery resistance really speaks to this idea that we have limiting beliefs, which are either missing information, like the context and perspective, or incorrect information. So my incorrect information was that I was not a good girl, that I was bad in some way. So that was my false limiting belief. And what's interesting, so in this chapter that I wrote in the book around recovery resistance, is this idea that we're all walking around with belief systems that we developed when we were 8 years old. It's like letting an 8-year-old decide for you what the world means. And if you think about it that way, it's kind of crazy, right? Like, why would I do that? I would never let an 8-year-old tell me what the world is all about. That's crazy. But if we don't examine our beliefs, that's exactly what's happening. And then we go through something called confirmation bias. So I have this belief I'm a bad person. I go out in the world, I make a mistake, I get some negative feedback, and I go, yep, I was right. I'm a bad person. Right? And so that works in all kinds of ways. We see it in our political system, and we won't talk about that. But but what's interesting about recovery is that it forced me to really challenge my limiting beliefs. Can I get sober? Can I evolve into what I think of as a good person? Your default mode network is very closely tied to identity. And so recovery for me ended up being about a process where I was recovering my whole self, the good parts and what I thought of as the bad parts. And as it turns out, spoiler alert, that the bad parts were actually parts, they were like my survival skills. They were trying to help me survive. And I just didn't know that. Addiction can be seen as a part of you that's trying to help you survive. And I used to often say, drugs and alcohol saved my life when I was 14, 15, 16 years old because I didn't have any coping skills. And had I been forced to feel all those feelings, I don't know that I would have survived. I barely survived as it was. But drugs and alcohol were my coping mechanism because I couldn't bear the pain. And so all this to say that, you know, yes, we get sober, we start learning some coping skills, but what we're really left with is this default mode network. And it's sort of like a comfort zone. We don't get too high, we don't get too low. We kind of live in this comfort zone because it's so closely tied to our identity. And so what ends up happening, what I see a lot, and I'm sure you do too, I'm sure you've experienced this too, where you do all the therapy, you go to all the meetings, you work steps, you help out, but you still find yourself like resisting doing good things for yourself. Like I put meditation on my calendar all the time. I only do it half the time, right? It's like I have this distraction, this resistance to to new ideas that might actually, it's really about taking action. And I've actually found the solution. Gosh, I wish I would have had this 30 years ago, but it's a simple journal exercise that I'll share with you, or your listeners, that they can download for free. It's at innercompassprogram.com. It's just a free journal exercise. It takes about 15 minutes. But it's about parts work. There's a part of you that wants to meditate. There's a part of you that wants to binge on Netflix for 5 hours and eat Ben& and Jerry's for 10 hours. Do you know what I mean? And so there is this writing process where you learn to honor and love both parts and to help them sort of settle down so that you can operate from like your higher self. And this process resolves the internal resistance so we can take action on the things that we know will benefit our lives. So we can help us kind of break out of like that upper limit of the default mode, that upper level of the comfort zone. And I am so obsessed with this. I wish I would have known this a long time ago, but listen, I'm happy to have it now because I'm really trying to grow to the next level. I think as humans, we all have like this desire to grow and evolve and create. One of my favorite books, The Artist Way by Julia Cameron, she's 12-step oriented as well. She talks about how creativity is the creator's will for us. And so, there was a shamey voice of like, "Oh, you're overpaid. You are blessed. You have everything and all that stuff. Why are you wanting more?" And what I come to realize is that like the more compassionate voice is, "Oh, I will always grow and evolve and change until the day I die." And creativity is really my gift to the creator. As I create, as I listen to my inner compass and I take actions, that's how I get led. And so it's just like this, and really that's how I experience God now, is by following my inner compass and taking action, especially when I'm afraid or uncomfortable, like there's growing pains, that's a thing. But to really not shame myself for wanting more out of my life. I do want to fulfill my purpose. I do want to help others. That makes me really happy. But it's this and I do want to have other experiences. Like I'm 56 years old. I have, all the things, whatever. I don't need any more things. Like you and I know that it's not the things that bring us joy, it's the experiences. And it's the little moments, like sharing a sweet moment in the kitchen with my husband who loves me, petting my dog who is the cutest thing on the planet. Do you know what I mean? Like it's the little moments, it's being out in nature. But it's like, and being creative and sharing what I've learned, that's what brings me joy. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have like this calling for something more. And so I encourage it. Follow your inner compass. What is it that brings you joy? It's the creativity, anyway, I could go on and on, but this is like my favorite thing to talk about is like, how do we serve ourselves and each other through this lens of creativity?
Okay. So you have, I love it, Arlina. That's a wonderful information, something we can all chew on. Why don't you go ahead and tell people one more time about the book, The 12 Steps for Skeptics, and what you were trying to say through that,
Mhm.
and then just kind of wrap it up with that.
Yeah, thank you. So the 12-step guide for skeptics was really about offering context and perspectives to ideas that really challenged me. Right? And and so I'm just like, "Hey, I don't know what's right for you, but this is what helped me." And I will say that there are some things about the program, it's really meetings and things like that that are problematic. It's not easy for everyone to be able to constantly translate, ideas from religious white men into, you know, like, what does this actually mean for me? The ideas of spirituality separate from religion. There is a lot of, the 13 stepping that happens in the rooms. And so, sponsorship can be super challenging. Not all sponsors are created equal. There's people getting their feelings hurt. And I just want to say that there are some challenges, but the 12 steps are a worthy endeavor. The steps are a worthy endeavor. The people can be problematic, but don't let the people stop you from getting access to this process. It's free and it's transformational. It helps you identify your limiting beliefs, gain new information. So the whole point of this, John, is to be free and to, cultivate these feelings of happiness and joy and purpose and productivity. It's a beautiful way to live. And don't let things like recovery resistance, that's your mind is looking for reasons not to do this. Because we're afraid, right? And so I have a lot of compassion for that. And so all I'm saying is that there is a gentle way to get through this process safely. Here are the pitfalls, the obstacles, the things you need to look out for. And here's how to get the benefits. That's all I'm saying in this book. I even last 8 pages of the book are like this. These are the exercises I did with my sponsor. And there's a bazillion ways. Everybody brings something different. So I'm not saying that this is the only way or the right way or anything like that. I'm just saying this is what I did. I've been sober for 31 years.
I get it, and, and it makes me think of when I was first sober, some of the things that I said in the rooms, like, because I was like, "It's my way or the highway. The way I've been taught is the only way." It was very, kind of far rightish, if you will, if you were to put it in that kind of perspective, and
Some
Arlina,
people
this is
need
just
that.
I'm sorry, what?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was just going to say some people need really strict boundaries, and that's okay too.
Exactly. Right,
In the
whatever
beginning.
works for you, right? Just
Yeah.
kind of,
Yeah.
like you said earlier, you kinda go with the pull, go with the feel, n and that's gonna change over time. You and I have both been sober. I've been sober for 35 years now, and what I have experienced and how I have viewed the rooms and what exactly happens within the rooms is, it's changed over time, and I pray to God that if I'm alive for 5 more years, that I don't have the exact same God that I had when I walked in the rooms, or when
Yeah.
at 30 years, or
Yeah.
35 years, or 40 years, or whatever the case may be. You just you want to evolve and grow and create and be something different as time moves on.
Yeah. That's beautiful.
Okay, Arlena, well, I always read from page 164 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous to close us out. And it says, abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Like Arlena was talking about. Admit your faults to him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us, and we shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. And Arlena, if you'll give me all those links, and I'll make sure I put them all in the show notes so people can find you, get a hold of your stuff, the whole 9 yards. I really appreciate you being on the podcast, on the episode today, I should say.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's always a pleasure.
God bless.